The A's financial plan, delivered to Vegas city officials and lawmakers, was one big dog and pony show. There was really nothing there. But if you read and listened to those in Vegas, specifically media members, everything was good. In fact, the headline was, wow, the A's being incredibly gracious wouldn't even take the entire $380 million of public tax money. Only 350 of it. I did a whole video based on this ridiculous concept earlier in the week, which you can see right here. But I wanted to talk to a guy that is one of the lone dissenting voices in Las Vegas, one that actually sounds skeptical. Scott Roeben. Scott runs the website Vital Vegas, which has a Twitter account of more than 200,000 followers. And since day one, Scott's been pretty cynical about this thing actually getting done. We go over just about everything here, why he's one of the lone cynical voices in Vegas, why everybody else seems to be just kind of taking the A's at their word, how the locals feel about this whole thing, and maybe most importantly, what's the real end game for the A's? Is it getting to Vegas, or is this just leverage? Buckle up for the next 45 minutes because you're going to get a full education on the Vegas side of John the Con scam. After listening to this, anybody in Vegas should want nothing to do with the A's. But just a reminder before the interview, please subscribe to the channel. Click on this button below me. That way you'll be notified every time we have long-form interviews or content about the A's like this. And I promise to keep the heat on this thing until the very end. So make sure you are clicking on that button right below me to subscribe to make sure you are one with this channel. Without further ado, Scott Roeben. Scott, how you doing?
All right. Thank you for having me on. It is a fascinating topic, to be sure. You know a lot more about it than I do, but I talk to a lot of folks here in Vegas. So my opinions are rarely my own. It's usually informed by sometimes people sitting in the room, sometimes executives and other sources. So I guess that's a full disclosure. Sports is not really my, I wouldn't say it's my wheelhouse, but Vegas is. So that's how the Venn diagram overlaps.
Well, I think there's a real value there because I don't think you need to know sports, nor do I think you need to know specifics in ballpark financing to read a room and to read a situation. And I think that sometimes in this situation, people get caught up in the sports or the nuts and bolts of the financing or the ballpark design, and they fail to see maybe the undercurrent of reality. So you've got tons of sources. There's a reason you have more than 200,000 followers on Twitter and an incredibly popular blog/website at Vital Vegas. And a piece that you just recently wrote about the A's financing plan for this ballpark really, it caught me because one of the top lines is Las Vegas continues to have its chain yanked and pretty much everyone involved is complicit in this clown show. That sets the tone for your piece of disbelief. So why specifically do you feel like this is a chain yanking by the A's?
Yeah, I mean, it started almost from day one for me. I had no exposure to the A's. I had no knowledge of ownership, of the history, of the popularity, level of popularity of the team, and I really kind of I had actually heard that the A's might be coming to Vegas a few years ago and had actually tweeted it I think it was the first tweet where I was like, better get used to the Las Vegas Athletics. But as time went by, I think it was pretty obvious, and I will never forget a top-level casino executive. These folks, obviously, in Vegas are privy to a lot of information that the public isn't. They're in the same meetings as a lot of the politicians and the decision makers about, say, public financing or other decisions in Vegas. The very first thing that this person, I was going to say he, but it could be a he or a she, said to me was, these are not serious people. And the second thing he said to me was, you can never have too many imaginary ballparks. So he went on to explain his feelings about it because he actually was very familiar with Bally's Corp. and the fact Bally's Corp had no money. This is the company that owns the operations on top of the Tropicana site. And so he knew they were not financially able to build a resort on their own, which has come to pass. He also talked a lot about the things you're talking about, the financial aspects of financing a stadium, how public money plays into it. I know more about TV rights than I ever thought I would. I know more about kind of like how you generate revenue from a resort that would be sharing space with a baseball stadium, the limitations of that in a place that's close to an airport because the FAA has height limitations. Like I've learned more about it than I ever wanted to or thought I would. But ultimately, the only thing I've really done is just connect dots that our local media doesn't seem to want to do, or they're not able to do for whatever reason. I think in Vegas, a lot of times it just has to do with you lose access if you're critical. You lose access to interviews with the folks involved. They'll just cut you off, whether it's the public official or somebody related to the team. They stop answering your calls. And if you're a newspaper, you can't have that happen. So they're basically just taking what they hear, say from the A's or a representative or a consulting company, an analyst, say, who's doing projections of attendance and all this other stuff, and they just kind of repeat it. But it was pretty evident to me in this latest meeting, there's no financing. Like, that's the bottom line is, if you have financing, don't keep saying you're going to get it. Don't keep saying you're excited about people, companies loaning you money, or excited about putting your own family equity into it. Like, show that you have financing. There's been no evidence of it whatsoever. So that's ultimately, for me, that it doesn't matter if you're a lay person or an expert. The bottom line is there's no financing. So now what? Why keep blowing smoke? It's been pretty obvious from the beginning that Vegas's chain is being yanked because these are not serious people. And I don't know. I didn't know about the reputation of the ownership and management until they came to Vegas, but I don't know how anybody takes them seriously. I don't know how Major League Baseball takes them seriously. I don't know how the fans ever took them seriously. But there's nothing to show that they're serious people in Las Vegas.
And A's fans in Oakland know that, and public officials. We had the mayor of Oakland on my show a couple of weeks ago, and she noted the same thing. There is just no evidence that John Fisher, Dave Kappel, et cetera, are serious people. It's a great way to put it. And my guess is that the Vegas media that is covering this, it's one of two things. Either, as you said, they're worried about access cutoff in case it does happen, in case the A's do come. They certainly don't want to not have a pipeline of information if the A's come. But also, maybe part two is they are just hopeful. Like, it's not going to be branded a hater. And so it's better to wave pom-poms and get people excited than it is to really read between the lines. Could that be part of it?
I think that's exactly right. Everything that we've seen from the A's, from the Bally's, from media, from local officials, the people who signed off on the public financing, it's all it's optimism. But optimism is not facts, and optimism is not the reality of you don't build something when there's not funding for it. And there's also this element of being in denial about how the Las Vegas vibe about the A's, the feeling toward having professional baseball has soured. Because of all the kind of, there's been a number of very strange things where we're starting down a path and the rug kind of gets pulled out from under us. They had this binding agreement with a different site for the ballpark, binding agreement, which everyone in the world who speaks English takes as, oh, you're committed to this? A binding agreement means you're bound to it. This is the agreement. The union makes a phone call. You're not doing it there because the company you're working with is non-union. That deal falls through. So binding agreement fell through. Then you've got hey, where are these renderings? We thought we'd see renderings months ago. There was a horrible kind of tragedy here in town. The A's used this tragedy as an opportunity to say, we don't feel right about releasing our renderings during this very sad time. And then don't release the renderings for months again. So it's just this kind of like treating Vegas like we're the backdrop of the A's drama, and Vegas is not good at being a background. We're starting to feel used, kind of like we're being curbed or whatever you call it, gaslighted. All the kids are saying gaslighted, and that's what it started feeling like. And I think the local media, there's kind of a history of that, kind of just repeating what they're told. So, but what gives them the idea that when the A's say, we've got a group of investors that are excited to invest, like what gives them the indication that that's true other than somebody saying it? And what gives them the impression that an analyst going, we're going to get 30,000 fans at every game? That's our projection. We're making all kinds of financial decisions based upon this projection that is absolutely outlandish. If you know more about the attendance at the A's games than I do, but 30,000 people is absolutely absurd. Vegas is magical, but it's not going to cause tens of thousands of people to materialize to go to an A's game 80 times in a season. It's just absurd. So we've seen this pattern enough now. I think we should be able to kind of, it doesn't take Mensa level thinking to realize that the A's management and ownership, they don't really have their act together. And it shouldn't take a lot of brain power to realize, like, once they're in Sacramento, they're being wooed. So 3 years is a long time to be playing in Sacramento. I don't see ground being broken in Vegas unless it's just some kind of symbolic thing with gold shovels, where they do that whole photo op. But it would be irresponsible to start building a ballpark without financing. And I also think the forces at play in Sacramento are very persuasive, because I think the Seminoles they're offering real dollars to help build the ballpark there because it's close to the Hard Rock Casino. I think the owner of the what do you call it? The other team, minority, baseball team, very interested in having an MLB team. So I think there's a lot that's going to happen between now and then, and this whole dog and pony show of we've got investors, they just haven't given us anything yet, or we've got family equity, but we haven't actually withdrawn any money from the bank yet, and we've got this public money, which they forget to mention. You have to spend $100 million before you get any of this public money. Not one penny has been spent. The demolition of Tropicana is being paid for by the owner of the land, Gaming and Leisure Properties. So that does not involve the A's at all. Bally's Corp, the company that was supposed to pay for the demolition, has no money to do it. So there's just been a lot of kind of bait and switch, kind of shady vibe, kind of just PR BS, and it's now been months. So you said it earlier, but I'm definitely in the skeptic. I'm in the skeptic camp, in case that wasn't obvious, but it's not just me. It's the people making the decisions. I think a lot of these politicians who signed up and said, we're 100% gung-ho for this move, they've soured on it too. They can't really say that publicly. The casinos haven't really said much because they don't really care. It's been sold as this big benefit to the casinos, but it's not really. You're not going to peak the peak on a baseball day. Their rooms are already full in that neighborhood. It's not really bringing anything to the table for the casinos. So they can't be critical either. It's like with F1, you can't come out and say this is a dumb idea and it's ruining Las Vegas, or we're feeling duped. You can't come out and say that. Sorry, I forgot the question. You got me up so early. I have so much energy and so many words to get out. I got up at noon.
At noon Pacific for me. Thank you that the alarm clock went off at noon. I can't believe you got up this early. Pot of coffee on. Crows or roosters are crowing. It's amazing. It really is amazing. It's interesting. When I was out there for the Super Bowl back in February, I spoke to a cabbie, and she was a lifelong Vegas resident. Actually, I shouldn't say that. She had been in Vegas for 35 years, I believe, but she grew up in the Bay Area, so she knew of the A's, and she had grown up around baseball in the Bay Area. And I said, so what's it like around here in terms of A's excitement? She goes, there is none. I said, well, isn't the prospect of a new professional sports team got to be exciting in some ways? She goes, we want a winner, and the A's are the losers, and we all know it. And she goes, we don't like that site either as a city for a ballpark. So when you say, the place has soured as well on this because of all the chain yanking that has happened even since February, I wonder if they put up for a vote the public money, which they didn't, $380 million, which is allocated at the moment for the A's to help build the ballpark. The A's have to come up with $1.2 billion on their own. But is there enough of a taxpayer support where residents of Vegas want to see public money going to the A's?
They would never let it go to a public vote. The A's, the politicians, the kind of movers and shakers who want it to happen would never let it go to a public vote because there's no way it would be approved at this point. The initial enthusiasm, I think, had they had that vote on day one, I think there's a chance, because Vegas has been so hungry for sports of any kind for so long. And that's why the Vegas Golden Knights, hockey's like, who cares about hockey, right? It's like the 7th most popular sport or whatever. But you say anything critical about the Vegas Golden Knights in Vegas, and they will drag you down the street by your toenails. It's Vegas and the Raiders, same thing. Like, Raiders weren't beloved exactly, but they come to Vegas now. Everybody loves the Raiders, right? So I think Vegas was so hungry for pro sports for so long that the kind of overriding tone when it was announced was, holy cow, we've got another professional sport. We'd rather have the NBA, but we'll take baseball. There's our minor league team. That was the word I was looking for before. Minor league team. And, as popular as a minor league team can be, we were ready for baseball on day one. But it's been this kind of pattern of disappointment and head scratching and, seeing that the Oakland fans' reaction to the ownership has really shaped my view of the ownership as well, because these folks, there are some longtime fans there. Huge disappointment to be losing their team. They're not thrilled that they have a losing team and that it's poorly managed, but they'd rather have a team than not, I think. And so seeing that and seeing kind of these weird, some of it has been really surreal. There's this guy, I'm sure you've heard of him, Jeremy Aguero of I think it's called Applied Analytics or something. They basically hire him when they need these fluffy numbers. Like, when you're going to try to get investors, you tell them, look, our team's valued at this today, but it's going to be worth 10 times more when it moves to Vegas. And this he's over there with his calculator pretending to type in numbers, and then he'll say those numbers. And the reason you don't have investors is because investors are not stupid. They understand that this isn't real. This is the guy who goes, you know how many people we're going to have this weekend on the 4th of July? 4 billion. We're going to have 4 billion people in Las Vegas. Nobody ever circles back to say, did we actually have 4 billion people on the 4th of July? Well, nobody's circled back to say, well, hold on. You've got a ballpark with capacity of 30,000, and you're saying you're going to fill this thing 80 times a year, and that's how you're making your financial projections, and that's how you're valuing the team to get investors. Goldman Sachs is laughing. They're like, these are not real numbers. So the skepticism of the cab drivers of ordinary citizens, lay people, and people who watch Vegas, that has happened over time, and it's gotten worse over time. So, everybody talks about an expansion team, and that's where the conversation has started to go, because I've been calling them the Sacramento A's. So now what? How do we get Major League Baseball here if it's not them? So everybody talks about what might be next, what else could happen. We're talking years down the road, but I've sort of written them off. Like, until you show me that Goldman Sachs is putting money into your team, which they shouldn't, that's the moment where I say, hey, this could happen. And the one moment of optimism came when the owner of the land, of the Tropicana land, Gaming and Leisure, they're going to donate $2 billion to a hotel casino project in Chicago for Bally's Corp. So there was actually this moment of, wait, that sounds like real money. REITs they have a lot of cash. So that's real estate investment trust for other folks that don't obsess over things they don't care about like I do. They're going to finance a casino in Chicago. Like, wait a second. So could they do the same thing in Vegas? That really doesn't have a lot to do with the ballpark, but it has to do with like glimmers of hope. And it really is the only glimmer of hope so far. But the minute the A's say, we, the Fishers, rolling in cash at home, we're naked, rolling in our mounds of cash, we're going to actually put some of that cash forward. We're going to sell some Gap stock, and we're actually going to invest in this ballpark that we keep saying, and it's going to be a lot of money. It's going to be $500 million, and here it is. The minute that happens, I'm like, you actually did something. But that's never happened to this point. The renderings are horrific. They're not built on reality. So when they keep handing you BS, I have no other choice than to call BS, because there's nothing real that's happened so far. Nothing.
Yeah, there's a joke in Oakland that Dave Capel, the president of the A's, who's been in charge of all these renderings, has just a basement full of like 25 different ballpark renderings. Like, he wallpapers his basement with ballpark renderings because they've been doing this forever. And even on last week's meeting, the unveiling of the financing, it sounded like they admitted the ballpark's not going to look like that anyway. So they're already retracting what the dream setup would be. And I would say this to those residents in Vegas that read your website and follow you on Twitter. My opinion of Vegas as a sports town was forever changed in a good way when I went out to the Super Bowl in February, because I saw an event town that I always knew was a good event town. I'd been out there for boxing, but I saw it come together with just this really organized, orchestrated, big event for something other than boxing. Tons of people, media were happy, lodging was great, everything was set up really well, and there was a fervor from local fans about sports. I could tell people I were talking to on Radio Row, people I were talking to at restaurants, etc. It was like sports had arrived and we are ready for it. And I was like, this is a great sports town, actually. This is a great sports town. But what Vegas deserves is not John Fisher. It's an expansion team with a real owner like they have in the Golden Knights. And you mentioned the protectiveness of the Golden Knights. That's because they have an owner that actually cares, is organized, wants to win, spends money, has a game plan. And if you get John Fisher and the A's, you get none of that. These guys are actually not only disasters, but at times incompetent and perhaps criminal. So this is the last thing you need, because you'll probably get an expansion team if the A's don't come. So I think that Vegas is smelling the waft of, absurdity coming off of the A's, which is right. I guess my question is, if baseball really wants a team in Vegas, could they just force this to happen even if the Fisher family is a disaster? Or will Vegas politicians and lawmakers be like, you know what? We're going to sit this one out and we'll wait our turn?
Well, I think at this point, politicians would actually be relieved if this deal falls through.
Wow.
And that really, I think, comes from that misgiving related to the use of public funds to build a stadium. I think they got on board with this early on. They signed off on this in kind of this rush. I was one of the people saying, when they submit this proposal, they're going to do it 15 minutes before the end of this legislative session. So nobody has time to read any of the fine print or do any of the math. And that's exactly what they did. They kind of snuck it in. Everybody signed off because you don't want to be the one who doesn't want a professional sport in Vegas. You've got pressure from a variety of sources here in Vegas to make it happen. But I think there would be a sigh of relief because you've got when you get the school teachers mad, you don't want school teachers mad at you. They have a pretty strong, that's a strong voting block. There's no voting block of A's fans in Vegas that's going to reelect you to your position. So I think it would be a relief. I don't know how it's going to unfold as far as timing, because I think the A's are going to stick to this story, even when they're playing in Sacramento, that everything is happening. But I think there has to be a point where if nothing happens in Vegas financially, you've really got to just go at some point, and then you'll see all the politicians turn around and go, something didn't smell right about this.
Right.
I was talking to my staff for many, many months about how these meetings were not going well, about how ridiculous the renderings were. Every time I write a story about the A's now, I go to AI and I generate 20 renderings, and they all look exactly like the one they get. We're facing the sun. I know batters. I know enough about sports to know that batters love looking directly in the sun. And every rendering they've done. And then you've got the head of the LVCVA, the Las Vegas Convention Visitors Authorities, just spewing like gobbledygook about, well, of course we know the sun's going to be in their faces, but what we really want is a view of the strip through this window because it's going to be so beautiful. And all the players are like, you're going to what? I'm going to have to wear sunglasses when I'm batting? What is happening? And all the fans who are going to have heat stroke because the sun is in their face. The whole thing is it's perfect for me because my blog and Twitter account are largely humor-based. So it has been a fantastic blessing to a humorist to have the A's doing what they're doing in Vegas. Sometimes I have to take off the satirist hat and be like, oh, I'm a taxpayer. So then it's not as funny. But for the most part, it's been if you saw my story about the financing, the image I used was of actual clowns wearing A's garb because that, and fans were saying that from day one, this is a clown show. This is a dumpster fire. They were using all those terms. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is a professional baseball team. These are professionals. These are wealthy, successful strategists. They are going to, no, none of that has been evident. The people they hire are buffoons. They seem to be buffoons. I don't know about the criminal stuff you're talking about. I'd love to hear more, maybe off the record or whatever, but there's shadiness because, when you're using a tragedy to avoid having to release your renderings because you don't have your act together, I have no other words for that. That's shady. And dumping a deal that's already been signed, that's shady behavior. So that's all we really have to go on is their track record here. People like you who are experts in this field know the history of the ownership and management and the team. All I have in Vegas is what I've seen and what I've heard from people who know. And they have not taken them seriously from day one. They consistently, they're a laughing stock. So it's hard to do business with a laughing stock. And if you think these excited investors are thrilled to be working with people who are considered a laughing stock, it's just not true. These are smart people, and they're not going to flush their money. And I don't think the owner of the Tropicana site is going to flush billions of dollars into a resort that can't make money because they don't have enough room because they're presumably putting a ballpark on this space. So it's a house of cards. And I think as we go along, we're seeing more of the cards fall. And I think that's where we are now is put up or shut up. that at some point, that has to be what's required of the A's. Stop talking about what you're going to do and do something.
And I think, that idea that it's built on a house of cards is really true in Oakland as well. And that's when I mentioned criminality. I think what we've seen over the history of John Fisher and the reign of him with the A's is a lot of lies, a lot of underhanded decision making, a lot of using this as an excuse for that, using this as an explanation for that when they're totally separate. And the idea that you could kind of lie and cheat your way out of town by putting up a false narrative. And that is that A's fans don't care. That's kind of the prevailing notion of the last 10 to 15 years in baseball is A's fans don't care. See, they don't show up to the ballpark, so they have to move the A's. And that's been orchestrated by John Fisher. This is not even opinion, it's fact. They have never spent a dollar on retaining their own players as they've gone to free agency. They have never spent a dollar to bring in better talent on their payroll. They have never tried to spend to build a winner. When they've had a winner, they've disassembled it, dismantled it. They allowed the Oakland Coliseum to become decrepit. And when the Raiders and the A's share the Oakland Coliseum and the Raiders wanted some type of movement forward, the A's squatted on it. John Fisher said, no movement, not happening, not under our watch, forcing the Raiders to look at the sweetheart deal that Vegas gave them. And now the A's after that, and then putting banners up around Oakland that said, rooted in Oakland. We're the last men standing. We're the last team standing. We're of Oakland. Suddenly go, we can't be here anymore. We got to go. And this is at the 11th hour when the city of Oakland finally came to the table and said, we'll give you what you need. We've cleared Howard Terminal on the water, which is what they wanted for the ballpark. And they said, now we need the property around it too. Okay, the city of Oakland got them the property around it. And suddenly they go, nah, we need to go to Vegas. So at every moment they've shifted and pushed the goalposts and made excuses why. And so that's where I really think their integrity is completely full. And it's empty. And so I would just say to Vegas residents, if you want baseball, I don't blame you. If you want a pro team, I don't blame you. You don't want this pro team or this ownership because they're really bad. They're really bad at what they do. And I think they're bad people, honestly. So I'm glad to see your skepticism. And I will say this speaks to me is that I've reached out to a couple of media members in Vegas because honestly, I'm trying to be objective. I do have a background in journalism. And I've tried to say, well, let's tell the story from the Vegas side. And they don't want to seem to talk. I don't get a lot of responses. And I tend to believe that the writers, the broadcasters from Vegas, like you said, that don't want to have access cut off or don't want to be labeled haters, don't really want to say what they believe. Because if they did, the reality is I don't think anybody seems to believe that this thing is actually legit and going to happen out there.
Yeah, I think they hide a little bit behind that veil of objectivity because that means they seem to take that as I can't come to any conclusions about this. I'm presenting what the information that I've been told. I don't have any personal take on this. That's insane to me, because I think they're obligated. They have access to more information than most lay people. So I think they have an obligation to lay it out there. This is hundreds of millions of dollars of public financing. So I think there's a responsibility to be forthright about the conclusions that you come to about it. And I think the only reason my article caught on was I just said what I think is a natural conclusion to that meeting. There's no financing, but that's not what was reported. What was reported was the A's lay out their plan for financing.
And that the A's are going to give you $30 million. You gave us 380. You know what? Keep 30.
We're not even going to use all your money.
That was the headline.
We have so much financing. Take some back. Go pave a road. We're actually donating $30 million to Las Vegas. Like that's right. Totally how it came across. We're not even going to need this $30 million.
I couldn't believe that was the takeaway.
More gracious.
Yeah, right.
So what do you think about this? Do we have a little more time? Because I want to ask you, what do you think about this thing? Because from day one, I've been doing these little asides because my folks always thought this is all just gamesmanship to try and get a better deal from Oakland. So I occasionally will drop that into the conversation. A lot of experts tell me that's BS because the deal is so far beyond saving. So then a few days ago, we get these news stories about potential buyers kind of having a de facto gag order. These are folks that would want to buy the team and keep them in Oakland. Like, is that a thing? I didn't know what to make of that because I don't know anything. But I thought that was interesting because it kind of echoed what my folks were saying, was that even after everything that's happened, it's still more likely they would stay in Oakland than come to Vegas. That doesn't compute in my brain because I've already got them moving on to Sacramento and staying in Sacramento in my world. So
I think your BS detector is really sharp, and I think your sense of Sacramento's more likely than Vegas, I'm leaning that way as well. And I think Sacramento's more likely than Oakland. And I say that because I don't know how much better of a deal the A's could get from the city of Oakland. Again, they wanted to be on the water, Howard Terminal, really cool lot, which is kind of industrialized now, but you put a ballpark down there, it could be awesome. And the city reportedly said, we can do that. And then they said, well, now we want to own all of the property around the ballpark, which is worth billions of dollars. Now, this is an organization that has never spent $1 on their team or the ballpark. And they're asking the city to give them property now and real estate. And reportedly, the city could make that happen. I'm not sure what else they needed. And the mayor told me right before she thought they had a deal, then John Fisher said, sorry, actually, his henchman, Dave Cavill, called and said, no, we're going to Vegas. So she was like, we were used here. So in that way, I don't know how you go back to Oakland and get anything better. Is it plausible that they're using Vegas to leverage for a better ballpark in Salt Lake City, in Richmond, Virginia, in Sacramento itself? Sure. I think the big deal to me that seems evident is John Fisher doesn't like owning a baseball team because the last 20 years has proven he doesn't mind if nobody shows up to games, everybody actively hates him, and they don't win. That is totally fine with him. So my guess is he just wants to move somewhere to flip the team. And from what I read in the financing report for Vegas is that Vegas is going to mandate that he owns the team for 5 years or more before he can sell the team for whatever the profit is. So whatever this shell game is by John Fisher, it must be just, let me get somewhere who will build me a ballpark for free, and then I can sell it in 5 years, quadruple the money I invested, maybe even more. I think he bought it for $300 million and he's going to sell it for $2 billion or whatever. And then I'm out of this business and I'm good. I did what I needed to do. But I think, yes, it doesn't make any logical sense that Major League Baseball would waive the expansion fee that they would get from Vegas and a relocation fee that they should get from the A's for relocating to Las Vegas and go to a much smaller market media-wise than the Bay Area. Why would they leave all that money on the table? It doesn't make any sense. And John Fisher, again, as you said, suddenly waves a wand and has $300 million in financing and $800 million in personal equity. And he's just going to he's suddenly going to become the billionaire that he never was for 20 years in Oakland. None of that makes any logical sense. So is this all the 3-card Monty to get a better deal somewhere, whether it's Sacramento or elsewhere? Smells like it, but they've done such a bad job to their own brand that if you are Salt Lake or you are Northern Virginia or you are a place that really wants a professional baseball team, inheriting John Fisher seems like the single worst thing you can do. I mean, as you said, even in Vegas, they're like, these are not serious people. And that's a direct quote, not only from your sources, I've heard that other places as well. So if you were Salt Lake City's mayor or, relocation, Nashville wants a baseball team. If you're Nashville and you do any research, just make a call or text somebody, they would all be like, well, you don't want the A's. You certainly don't want John Fisher. So I don't know. They want a sweetheart deal somewhere, but I don't know how they could possibly get it with how they've run this thing.
The only excitement that I've heard about the A's has come out of Sacramento, and it's I've heard a lot about the Seminoles. They have very deep pockets. They would be very excited to have a ballpark in the neighborhood. Like, and I think the fans there seem primed. They have that kind of enthusiasm that I think Vegas had that first week or so in hearing that the A's might come. But yeah, you're exactly right. It's hard to know what the future, what the ultimate goal is. But and it, it's, I don't want to speak badly of Vegas, but in many cases, our leadership is not sophisticated. Like our major organizations, our industry they don't tend to be led by people that are super sophisticated. So I think it's taking some time for the reality to sink in. And it's that optimism can take something so far, but after that, we had a resort here on the Strip that was supposed to have a stadium and a hotel. It was a decade of me saying this is bullshit, and every local paper, every politician, everyone kept saying this financing is done, and it would happen every couple of years because they needed to extend their permits. It took more than a decade for the project to finally be deemed like, yeah, this is not coming to pass. I had been screaming about it a decade. So if it takes 10 years for our local, our experts to realize that something is nonsense, it's indicative of a kind of this dreamy-eyed optimism, sports, hot dogs, like it's almost like a romantic vision. And in the beginning, the A's seemed to be the answer to that kind of whimsical desire to have another pro sports team. But I think it's becoming really evident that Vegas they're playing on our naivete and our excitement about sports to kind of just have this narrative going when there's really nothing of substance to hold it up, other than just people saying it's still going. That to me, that's where we are. And this meeting the other day was, holy cow, they're saying this out loud, and they're presenting it in a way that makes it sound like something could possibly maybe down the road happen, but there was nothing of substance. And we've seen that over and over. And I think you made a great point. The Fisher dynasty, their financial dynasty, that's not really at play. It's never felt like Fisher's willing to put anything into this himself. He seems to be a master of like, let's get concessions and let's get contributions, and public money for stadiums just at a fundamental level is a terrible idea. But it seems like he's just, he's taking what he can get, and let's see who the highest bidder is, and let's manipulate the parties involved to kind of play them against each other, as you said. Like, how is Utah in the conversation suddenly, and how is coming to Vegas makes no financial sense for exactly the reason you said. Like, TV revenue that's the revenue. Ticket sales for 6,000 people coming to a game, that's not paying for anything. It's TV. Vegas is a tiny, tiny market. It's 2 million people. So go to Sacramento, the checks keep flowing. That's pretty tempting to him. I love that this has so many moving parts, because as a blogger, it gives me something to talk about every day. Like when I'm being quoted when I'm on your show and I'm being quoted in Sports Illustrated and I know nothing about sports, that's a good day for me. Well, so I say, Mr. Fisher, you keep plugging along, keep yanking that chain. I have something to be outraged about, and I get to do a victory lap when I'm right. And, when they're a few months into playing in Sacramento, they go, we kind of like it here. We're in a minor league ballpark, but down the road, we got our friends, the Seminoles. They're going to pay for half of our stadium here. Why don't we stay? And then you go through this whole rigmarole about the league going, please just build something somewhere, do something, so we're not embarrassed as an organization, because I think it's an embarrassment to the league now.
It is. It totally
is. They jumped through all the hoops of approving the move to Vegas, and as you said, kind of like we're going to cut you a break on these fees. And they've got nothing to show for it except just a public embarrassment, a debacle, a clown show.
That's exactly right. It's a debacle and a clown show. And I'll leave you with two things. Number one, the idea that the A's say, well, we'll start spending money to ramp up to Las Vegas. Wouldn't you spend money to help lure the money into building your ballpark in Las Vegas? Like, this would be the time to show you're serious about baseball when you're trying to find a new destination. But no, they're still the cheapest organization in professional sports as they try to sell them and market themselves. Number two, John Fisher's owned this organization for 20 years. He has never done a public interview, never done a public press conference. That sounds insane. If you're a Vegas sports fan and you've seen even Mark Davis do whatever, he has never done it. The only time he did it was last year. He sat down with a team-friendly reporter. He was allowed to record the interview, but couldn't use the sound bites on TV. He had to transcribe the sound bites and put them in written form as a graphic on television because John Fisher's team had to make sure they cleared everything, every word that was publicly put out. He's terrified of speaking, terrified. He's hiding. And I think that's because there's a lot to hide. So if you're a Vegas fan, it's the last type of owner you want, where he is his own worst enemy, lying through his teeth all the time and hiding from any type of transparency. So
we need a character, like our mayor didn't do anything, but everybody knows Oscar Goodman. Like, he was flamboyant and he always had a drink in his hand and showgirls. Like, if you're coming to Vegas, you better not be camera shy. We'll put up with a little shady behavior, but ultimately we know how to call BS. And it blaming fans for having a crappy team is terrible.
Awful. That
is terrible. It's like a comedian getting up in front of a crowd, nobody's laughing, and the comedian getting mad at the people not laughing. Right. Like, that's what he's doing. That's what the team is doing, is kind of like, we're not going to invest in players because nobody's showing up. This is why I have migraines.
It's something. Well, I want to tell you.
I'm getting gray hair from baseball, of all things.
Scott, I love your coverage of this. I love your satiristic, your satirical take on things. And I love the site and I love the tweets. And so thanks so much for spending time with us. So much time. That's really cool. And as this soap opera and clown show continues to careen off the side of the road, I'm sure we'll catch up again, man. Thank you.
Of course, and thanks for having me on. Thank you for being an actual expert on the subject, because the Vegas is not equipped to do this analysis. We have no real context. And so people that are smart and who understand the background are really necessary in informing our, this conversation. So thank you for caring about it. We're very new. We're sports virgins. Like, we've had it a few years, but we don't know. We've never seen a Fisher before. We just haven't. We've seen hucksters, because Vegas history is full of hucksters. We've seen mobsters. We've seen a lot of kind of questionable characters, but we've never seen a Fisher. So when a billionaire says, I'm going to put money into this team, we go, he's a billionaire. Of course he's going to put money into this team. Well, where's the evidence that he's ever done that?
Never. He's never literally spent a dime. So go believe it at your own peril. I would say scale of 1 to 10, sports ownership. Golden Knights ownership is near a 10. They're amazing. Say Mark Davis and the Raiders are at a 5 or a 6. And I would say John Fisher is a 0. He is the single worst owner in all North American sports. Ask A's fans or San Jose Earthquakes fans, because he owns the MLS team. And the city built him a ballpark, a stadium for soccer, and they are the cheapest payroll in all of soccer and one of the worst teams. So it goes to show you, even if he gets a ballpark, still won't spend any money. So that's your fair warning. But, man, this was a great conversation. Thanks so much. If you are an A's fan and you're interested in this whole saga, if you're a Vegas resident and you're interested in the saga, I can't highly encourage you to go to this enough. Website is casino.org. That is Vital Vegas, and then at Vital Vegas on Twitter. Really great stuff from Scott. Scott, this was awesome, man. Thank you.
Hey, good talking to you. Thanks for having me on.